It's about 9 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, December 19th, 2023. A couple of big announcements today. But first, the little stuff. So this is the 7th cell of the 7th row. So I'm standing right here where the wire was. The left side, this side over here, is where the cows were last night. And this is where they're going to be this morning. So I'm seeing lots of good grass here. Not as good as the last row, but still really, really good. I know one of my commentators wants to see the grass in more detail. It's hard to tell. I'll try to get down here close. This stuff looks like it's been grazed, but it hasn't recovered, so I don't know what kind of grass it is. But you can see the purple stuff there. Let me see if I'm pointing at it. It's right there, that stuff. That is Dallas grass. That's kind of an in-between grass that shows up in the autumn. And, oh, this stuff here, I know what this is. This is that, I think it's that panic liver seed stuff. The stuff I identified as panic liver seed, but I don't know if I identified it properly or not. But this is just one little area. It's hard to get a sense of what the entire area is like. And with the goat weed like it is, I can try like throwing a hula hoop, but I don't think that'll really be very effective. The idea of taking random samples to understand the behavior of the system as a whole, to me, is I don't know the right way to put this. It's a valid technique, but it comes with some major caveats or warnings. So it's not just a simple matter of, you know, I measured more, so it is more. You have to know what confidence intervals and things like that are. How confident are you that that's the amount of forage in that area, given your techniques and the measurements that you saw? And that really, what that is a question of how likely is it that the true measure is actually this when what you measured is that, right? And that's a really big topic. It's an important topic. It's something that I think probably should be taught at a younger age to people, like the nature of numbers, like how they actually work in practice. You know, like we do have definite numbers, but in nature and in the real world, those definite numbers are not really that useful. Okay, number 2 is pretty important. Somebody asked if they can buy one of my steer. So the answer is yes, but yes, but. So understand, I just want to help you understand what you're getting into and what's, I'm new at this, right? And so I cannot make any kind of guarantees about the product. You're going to get something that I don't know what it's going to be. And I would love to hear what you get and how you get it. The other thing is I'm new at this. I don't know what I'm doing. And so if you are used to buying cows from people, you tell me what kind of behavior you expect. Okay. The things that I do know is that either you buy the cow and I harvest it myself, which please don't ask me to do that at this point. I'm going to learn how to do that, but not right now. Or you buy the cow and I set up a locker date. And I can send it to any locker you want in the area, but I prefer to use Hopkins County Food Locker. Okay. And the only reason I prefer to use them is I've used them a couple times, right? So it's not like they're my best friends forever and I'm never going to change. There's another one, I think it's called like Rail Yard 16 or something like that, 19, that people use around here. I'm not familiar with them, but I am familiar with Hopkins County Food Locker. And I don't know what the situation is, but I do know last year I had to call a year in advance to get a locker date. And I just didn't do it. I sold my calves instead to my neighbor who I buy my cows from, who I have bought my cows from in the past. I don't know if I'm going to buy from him, maybe one more cow, you know, just for comparison purposes. But his beef was really good. He's been doing it for a long time. He has a lot of experience. He knows exactly what to do. And I almost want to tell you to buy from him. And, you know, I kind of want to just feed him calves, you know, send my calves over to his ranch and let him finish them and sell them. I think at this point in the game, that's the way you're going to get the best quality meat out of my farm. He doesn't use my techniques. So he's following an older style. where he's more intensive on making sure the cows are healthy and things like that. I'm new at this, right? I'm a complete amateur. But he's kind of my mentor, whether he wants to be or not. That's kind of the case. So anyway, that's kind of the situation of the calves and the steer and stuff like that. Okay, number 3, big announcement, major announcement. Today, after 25 years, my wife and I, we got married on December 19th, 1998 in Washington State, at the Seattle Temple. And that was a very, very sacred and special experience for me. I'm going to show you one story. So inside the temple, we make an oath, a marriage oath, right? It's a covenant. And we kneel across an altar, and there's the officiator. And he basically explains some of the oath and the covenant we're making, and explains that it's a 3-way partnership between God, the husband and wife. And then he asks us, if we agree. And he asked me if I agree to the covenant. I said yes. And then my wife, who's from Korea, as you probably know, she said nay. Now, nay in Korean means yes. So I was what's the right word? I was surprised. I'm like, no, you're not supposed to use that word. You're supposed to say yes, right? But she was so, overpowered by the moment as well, that she spoke her native language and said nay. And the officiator and all the witnesses, they're like, well, I guess that's over then. But she said, no, yes. And he said, I'll ask it again. This time say yes or no. So he asked it again just to make sure. And she said yes. So at that moment, we were sealed together, not just for time, but all eternity, according to my beliefs and doctrines. And so I look forward not just to many, many more happy years of living together with her in this life, but we look forward to being reunited in heaven, whoever goes first, just like my parents were, and my grandparents, and my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents. And you go beyond that, and then we've done temple work for the dead, which to us, it sounds like a weird sequence of words for other people, but what that means is that vicariously, that means standing in for them, we perform these ordinances so that when they stand before the throne of God at the last day, and he asks if they've been baptized and if they have engaged in these covenants, that they can say they have, right? There's a scripture in the Bible about that. It talks about in 1 Corinthians about else why then are they baptized for the dead if the dead rise not at all, right? And so what he's referring to there was an ancient Christian practice where people were baptized for the dead. They received baptism in proxy for the dead, and in the expectation that the dead would one day live again. And what's the other scripture? It's in Peter. It's like the living the gospel. The essence is, although they can't live the gospel according to the flesh, they can live it according to the spirit, and then we who live in the flesh can live the gospel for them. Something like that. We're basically saying that we can perform these ordinances for people that have passed on. And another scripture that's important, and I know this is one they like to use against our doctrine, but this is one we actually use for our doctrine, is when the rabbis or the Pharisees asked Jesus the question about who is supposed to be married to whom in the afterlife. He said, don't you know that in heaven they are neither married nor given in marriage, right? And you might say, well, that's pretty obvious. Marriage doesn't last beyond death. But according to our doctrines, what he was saying was the marriage covenant needs to be formed on earth. That's the time for doing that covenant, and that's the time when it all needs to be resolved. Because in heaven, those things aren't done. They're done on earth. So this is the time that we get to experience mortality, that we get to make these sacred covenants with God and our spouses and our families. And this is the time that we get to prepare to meet our Creator. And we get to see those mansions, get a glimpse sometimes even of those mansions that Jesus has prepared for us. Many mansions, he says. Many mansions I've prepared for you. So that is, my faith and my testimony. That's my great happiness and pleasure. And although my wife doesn't always believe that I love her, I can honestly say that in the 25 years of marriage, there's never been a moment when I've doubted whether she's loved me, right? I've questioned, do you really love me, or did you just do this for, some other reason? But I've always been in love with my wife, and I'm really happy to, and I hope everybody I know that not all marriages work, and I know that not all marriages are happy. Certainly, our marriage wasn't happy 100% of the time, all the time. You know, it wasn't pure bliss for every moment, but I've never fallen out of love with her. She's still just as beautiful today as she was when we got married. And that's the way I see her. And she sees me as an old fat man. But when I look at her, she says konkakji, which that means is the inner lining on the bean, the soybeans, they have like a little piece of paper on the inside that's like translucent, not transparent, but translucent. And so what she's saying is your eyes are covered in that inner lining of the bean because you can't see clearly, konkakji, right? But no, I truly see her as a beautiful, beautiful young lady. And, you know, age is to me, for her, is just a number. She'll always be my first girlfriend, you know. So anyway, that's the important announcement, is that today is our 25th wedding anniversary. And I hope and pray, I think family is the most important thing. There really is nothing more important than family. And if you need a purpose in life, men, if you need a purpose, the purpose is family. If you can't find a wife, and if you can't have kids, then your purpose is to help grow your extended family. If you can have a wife and you can have kids, your purpose is to build up the next generation and prepare them to make, you know, sacred marriage covenants, and to prepare them to raise their kids, and so on and so forth. That's our purpose. There's really nothing else to life than you know, securing the future of our generations. You know, we look back to the past of our ancestors who somehow managed to survive everything in history. I can't imagine how they did it. I'm sure a lot of it was pure luck. I'll share a quick story. My ancestor in Scotland in the 1800s, the early 1800s, he was running an inn, right? And Scottish rebels who wanted to overthrow they wanted to basically secede from the English government because of the persecution of the English government against them. And so they decided to secede, and they used that inn to conspire together. And so when the English rounded everybody up and locked them up in a castle, my ancestor was one of those rounded up and locked in a castle. And they went through and they found witnesses for every single one of them, put him to death. And then he was languishing there for many years. And then finally they came to him and they said, we can't find anybody to testify against you. You know, there's no evidence against you. We have to let you go. And so he went home. And the first thing he did when he came home is he told his family, he says, we're going to America. We're leaving England. We're going to go live in America. And they settled in a place in Canada where nobody was far around. It was just trees. And that first year they were cutting down trees and plowing fields at the same time. I cannot imagine what that would have been like. Cutting down trees, pulling out the stumps and plowing the field and planting the crops and hoping they'll get a crop. Well, that autumn, or that summer, some missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints showed up at their door and shared a message about the Bible and about Joseph Smith and about Jesus Christ, and they were converted. They felt the spirit of the movement. They felt God was calling them, and so they packed their bags. They didn't even sell their property. There's nothing to sell, and they started traveling towards Nauvoo, Illinois. And you might remember in Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, I think it's Uncle Tom's Cabin, there's a scene where I think it was a runaway slave is trying to escape in the winter, and he has to cross a river, and he has to jump from iceberg to iceberg to get across the river. Well, that actually happened. There's a newspaper article about my ancestor. They were fleeing persecution at that time. If they found out you're a Mormon, they'd try to kill you. And so he was fleeing persecutors, and he had to get out of Dodge, so to speak. He had to cross the river, and so he had to jump from iceberg to iceberg to get away from the people that were trying to kill him because of his faith. And unfortunately, when he got to Nauvoo, it was too late. When my ancestors got to Nauvoo, Joseph Smith was already killed. And so they didn't get to see the prophet. I think they saw his corpse, though. They saw his body. But when they arrived, Brigham Young was there. He was leading the church. And Brigham Young told them, don't bother unpacking. We're going to go west. We're going to go far west. Where exactly we're going, I've only heard about it in books. And I've seen it in a vision. That's it. And so they packed their bags and they crossed the river, Mississippi River. That winter was super cold. in a place called Winter Quarters, which sounds glamorous, but it wasn't. It was people living in holes in the ground, literal holes dug into the bluff, starving to death and freezing to death. And some of my ancestors were buried there. And then he was chosen to go with the first expedition to go find where the saints were supposed to settle with Brigham Young. And they crossed those plains and they arrived, and then Brigham Young stuck his staff in the ground. He was not feeling very well that day. He was pretty sick, but he stuck his staff in the ground. He said, "This is the place." A barren wasteland. Salt lake. How are you supposed to water your crops with salt water? So, where he put that post in the ground, that staff in the ground, they marked it. And that became the cornerstone of the Salt Lake Temple. But that's my ancestors. My mom's side, some of them come from Texas. They fled the Dust Bowl to California, along with many others. Stock market crashed. He lost all his fortunes. He had to leave. But my dad's family, they came across the plains, fleeing persecution, settling in the desert. One of the great reasons they liked the Salt Lake Valley was they said, nobody will want this land. They'll leave us alone. They'll never want to come here and take this land from us. It's pure desert. It's a barren wasteland. And, the stories that they experienced there. I myself am descended from the 12th wife of Archibald Gardner. The 12th wife. He had 12 wives. You might be wondering, like, wow, what was that about? Mark Twain, when he visited Salt Lake, he said, famously, he said, anyone who's willing to marry more than one of those pioneer women deserves to go to heaven. So the story goes that he was enjoying his farm that he just established after traveling for so long. He finally got his own piece of earth to call his own, and he finally got his farm established, and he sat down on a chair on his porch. And it's the first time he had rest in his entire life. He sat down on a chair on his porch, and a messenger came. Brigham Young wants to see you. So he went, met the prophet, and the prophet said, the Lord wants you to take a second wife. Go ask your wife if she consents. And if she does, then you're going to have to find a wife and take her as your second wife. And that was the end of Archibald Gardner's rest. So he went and asked his wife. His wife said yes. And he was asked to marry a widow with multiple kids. A widow with multiple kids. And adopt those kids as his own, and take care of them and raise them as his own. So he did, and the prophet called him in and said, now you need a third wife, and you need a fourth wife, and a fifth wife, and a sixth wife. He had his eyes on a young girl, and he asked the prophet if it was okay to marry that girl. And he said, yeah, but you have to marry her mom too. You know, you have to take care of her mom. A lot of people, a lot of widows and women, not enough men at that time. A lot of the men were killed in the Mormon War and different things like that. Just a really hard life, you know. And one by one, the prophet called him in and said, you need to marry another wife. And sometimes he'd say, this is the woman that we need you to marry, you know. And one by one, he covenanted with them to not only give his life to support them, but also be with them for the eternities. And so Archibald Gardner never got a rest. He never once got a rest. Never once. He was always traveling and always helping. Not only that, they called him his bishop. And bishop at that time meant you took care of all the poor. His first wife was upset with Bishop Gardner because they would store up all this flour, right? And their storeroom was full of flour at the beginning of winter. And little by little, that flour would disappear. And she'd say, I don't know where the flour's going. I don't know where the flour's going. Well, she caught Bishop Gardner one time in the middle of the night. A widow came up and came to the storehouse, and he loaded up a couple bags of flour, and she left silently. So he was secretly giving away the flour that they had stored up. He was feeding the community. The town that I grew up in, the town that my dad grew up in Wyoming, was famous among the cattle rustlers and the train robbers. It was famous because if you showed up in the middle of winter with no food, if you were on the verge of death, they would feed you, they would clothe you, they would make you work, they would take care of you. And the guy who ran the store there, he never, ever, ever raised his prices in storms or in uncertain times. He always charged the same price, and somehow he's always able to find, you know, basic staples and keep his store stocked. And so he was a lifesaver for many of these people who weren't good people. They tore down one of the buildings in that area that was built in the 1800s, and the walls were lined with cash. So these people were not good people, but they got treated fairly. Nobody was turned away who was needy. And that's the way that my great-grandmother was raised, my grandmother was raised, and that's the way my dad was too. You know, my dad served in the military, but he was one of the most gentle persons I know. He worked as an aircraft mechanic, you know, and he just was not interested in hurting people. He'd rather help them, you know, and that's my family history, guys. Have a great day. Take care and bye-bye.